everybody. It's Erin Schertz, Marketing Manager at Ritz Tech, here with James Tanner. And I know you're all really excited to hear this presentation. I hope that you all saw that little commercial. Our registration for Ritz Tech is opening this Monday. We're really excited. I met James for the first time at Ritz Tech, and I'm going to introduce him right now. But the first thing that you should know about him is that he's my third cousin, and I found out at Ritz Tech through the Relatives at Ritz Tech app. So that was pretty exciting for me. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about James L. Tanner, and he will be our presenter today. So if you're getting started in genealogy, you are in the right place, and he is going to take care of you. He has so much knowledge to share and to give. And so please, as a reminder, ask any and all of your questions in the chat. Tell us where you're viewing from. We love to see all over the world where people are coming in from. And make sure that you ask your questions, even if you're watching the replay, because these are going to be up live even after today. The replay will be up after our live today is what I meant to say. And you can ask your questions at any time. So without further ado, I want to introduce James L. Tanner. He has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's in linguistics from the University of Utah and a JD law degree from ASU. He was an intelligence analyst in the U.S. Army, 39-year trial attorney in Arizona, and has spent 41 plus years in genealogical research. So this is the man to ask all your questions. He's a blogger. He blogs a lot, actually, if you go to Genealogy Star, and we can put links to this in the chat so that you guys can find out where to get all of James's content. He spent 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa Family Search Library, now called the Family Search Centers, and is presently serving at the BYU Library Family History Center. He's a member of Family Search GEDCOM Steering Committee, chairman of the board of directors of the Family History Guide Association. He presents at expos and conferences all around the US, Canada, and Europe, including Ritz Tech, which is in Salt Lake City, and online globally, worldwide next year. Registration again opens on Monday, September 18th, so make sure that you register so you can see him live there. And he's made and presented over 400 genealogy videos on YouTube. So we are really lucky to have him here with us today. James, thank you so much for teaching us help for the absolute genealogy beginner. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Can you hear me now? Hello. Hello, can anybody hear me? Okay.
We can hear you. You're good.
Okay, thanks, good. James. Okay, here we go. Actually, we're going to talk for people who are the absolute genealogy beginners. I'm talking about people that, for one thing, let's start with something that bothered me right at the beginning. Years and years ago, probably older than most of you who have been around on the world, computers got to be a big thing in genealogy. And I spotted a new publication called the Genealogy Computer Pioneer, and I decided to write an article. So I submitted an article to this magazine journal, and I got a letter back saying, "We love your article, but you need to learn how to spell genealogy." So I guess that alerted me to the fact that I'd better take care and actually know how to spell genealogy. It's spelled with an A. It is not genealogy. It's genealogy. So that's something since I have genealogy in my email address, I have to spell it for almost every time I tell somebody. So this is something pretty important, even though it doesn't seem like it. And genealogy is the study of family history and how people are related to each other. That's it. That's what we are. That's what we do. We study families and their history and find out how we're related to them. So that is kind of a simple way to look at it. We also use historical records, oral interviews, and genetic analysis to trace our lineage. The lineage is what we have going back all of our grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents. So we sort of divide those people into two categories. We have ancestors who we consider to be our lineal descent, people who are our grandparents, their families, and collateral relatives. That would be the children of other members of our family. For instance, our uncles and aunts' children who are our cousins. And we sort of call all those people relatives, and the rest of the people, sort of the ones we look at more specifically, are our ancestors. So the genealogy is really the story about your family. And if you consider it to be a dry kind of activity of just learning names and trying to remember all the names and all the dates and all the places and all these different things, you need to understand that these people are your family. They're the people who are part of the people that influenced you, and those who are your direct line ancestors are the ones who gave you your DNA. That's how you're made up, is because of these people. This is a large family, and my grandmother is almost in the center, and she's a younger girl with a white dress, and she's staring directly at the camera and has her hair parted down the middle. That's my grandmother. And I never knew my grandmother because she died a long time before I was born. This is kind of the invitation. So the invitation that genealogy is and family history, they're actually the same thing, is to come and learn the story. And the story just becomes more and more interesting and more and more. And I'm going to have to add this, complicated, because, and sometimes those family connections can be extremely complicated. And so it's always a challenge. And one of the things I've said for many, many years is that I would never pursue genealogy if it hadn't been difficult. It just wouldn't have been something that interested me. I just am not interested in things that are easy. It was the challenge of it. One thing I did discover recently that was sort of a commentary on, I guess, my attitude towards genealogy and doing all historical research, is that I've been going through all of the, and I'm going to say literally hundreds of thousands of pages of historical records that I have accumulated from the greater family. One thing that happens when you get really involved in genealogy is that everybody tags you as the person who needs to get all the records. So things start showing up, and you get photos and you get other things. It may not happen. You may have a family that is so spread out or so kind of diffuse out there, you can't quite get a handle on your family, that you may never find those things. But being the kind of person I am, from a small town in Arizona primarily, and from all of the time I've spent, my other relatives all coming from the same area of the country, I'm the repository. And I was going back through those records, and I found that I started doing research with sources in the third grade. And I was kind of interested to see some of my early research projects. And I was pretty varied in all the stuff that I was interested in researching. So I guess research is now kind of part of my blood, the way that I look at things. But here's how you start. And this is, I think, the thing that you really need to contemplate, because if it's not something you've done, it's something you need to do in order to actually be involved in doing family history and having the relationship and being able to relate to the people that you're doing research for or beginning to do research for. And so you begin by talking to your relatives and asking questions. And this might happen when you're young, and you might have to chase down people. And one of the great laments of those who are involved in genealogy is, oh, I wish I talked to that grandmother before she died. And all of these things that would you could resolve very quickly if you'd had an opportunity to talk to the people directly. So take that advantage, take that time now as you identify people, find out where they are, talk to them because you are related. They may hang up the phone, they may talk to you at length, you never know. But that creates a problem because, of course, talking to your relatives assumes that you know who your relatives are. So which comes first, the research or the talking? Well, the talking can happen if you know any relatives. We're not talking about, getting distant relatives immediately, but it's very, very important to communicate and begin to have uh, opportunities to talk and interact. One of the good places, I'm going to bring this up kind of continually, is the FamilySearch.org family tree and the website, the FamilySearch.org website, because that way you can begin to see who you're related to. And it's very possible through the program, if people start contributing and are involved in adding records to the family tree, then you can certainly attempt to contact them through the messaging system of the program. And so that's one way. And I do get from time to time, I do get contacts from people who I have never met and may never meet. But we now have a open line of communication, and we can talk about certain things if we need to do that. In genealogy, as a pursuit, you always start from what you already know, that's yourself, and then look for what you don't know, and that's everything else. So uh, even though you may think you know all of the information, you may find that as you begin recording that in a structure, that there's always information that you don't know immediately. You don't know where you came from. You don't know what part of the world you came from. I'll mention this early, and that's the current ascendancy of DNA as a part of genealogical research. And by taking a DNA test with one of the large companies like Ancestry or MyHeritage or 23andMe, you and putting your family tree online, you can begin to have connection with people who you probably never will know, but you're going to have some relatives. It's inevitable, especially if you go back in your family tree and start getting back a ways, a couple of 3 or 4 generations. It's almost today. It's very common that you will have a lot of people connected through a DNA test. If you're someone like me, which gives you a relative kind of extreme at one end of the spectrum, that would be I have into the tens of thousands, up to like 50,000 DNA matches, simply because I have an extensive family tree and all these people have taken DNA tests. So it would be helpful to learn something about how to do genealogy before you go too far. In other words, it's easy to look at a pedigree chart if you can figure out where the names go and start putting in your parents and your grandparents. But it's very helpful once you get to the point of putting in that first bit of information to learn something about the process itself. Uh, Years and years ago, when I started, I knew nothing. I mean, literally, I knew I knew a significant amount about my relatives simply because I'd grown up in this huge family, and uh, these were people that I knew from association and from references and all of that other things. But I didn't know really that much about those people. And as I began to learn that information, I began to understand very quickly that there was a lot I needed to learn. a lot of stories I could tell about the difficulties I had in understanding and learning simple things that needed to be learned about genealogy. And back then, as a matter of fact, it was years. I had been doing genealogy for years before I understood that there were conferences and that there were other people out there who were interested in genealogy. The fortunate thing we have today is this vast network called the internet that will allow us to really very quickly understand. I spent the first 15 years or more of my genealogical research simply discovering what my other relatives and ancestors had already accumulated about genealogical their history. And that was done by going primarily to the family history library in Salt Lake City and spending weeks at a time there. And so today, looking at the Family Search family tree, I could learn all of the information that I took 15 years to accumulate in about a week or two of just going through the family tree and learning about who I was and who I'm related to. And one thing you'll find very quickly is that genealogy is an information pursuit. In other words, we're looking for history, we're looking for information about our families. And you immediately recognize that you need structure and you need some kind of an organization to your family story. Today, in days before the computers, everything was on paper. Unfortunately, from my perspective, many people still are stuck on paper. And the problem with being stuck on paper is there's a massive amount of information out there. And paper records are just too voluminous. They're just too much paper. And you start getting lost because you can't manage it. And we understand now that there are organizational things. The Family Search Family Tree, for example, and the other family trees online are an organization and a structure for your family history. And you can put in all of that information into those structures. I understand from talking to people constantly that there are those who don't trust it. In other words, they've got to have a piece of paper because they don't trust it. Believe me, the paper is just as can be just as easily lost as any information that you put online. And there are ways and structures and procedures for backing up the information online so that you're relatively secure that it will not be lost. I have I've done quite a few presentations on backing up your data, and it's a whole subject that we could get into. Now, the question here is, would you drive a car on a freeway before you learned how to drive? If you did, you're lucky to be alive. So this is kind of the question I would ask people. I mean, what are you going to try to do? What are you trying to do genealogy without ever spending the time to learn how to do it and where the records are and how to learn it? So what you'll find very, very quickly as you get into genealogy is that there are records that when you want to know about a specific individual, somebody wrote down the records during that person's life. The person individually or other people made a record of that person, including what we call birth records and marriage records and death records and employment records and all sorts of other things, military records, all these different kinds of records. And basically the whole process and the meat of becoming a genealogist is learning how to discover what records exist, and then how do I access those records. Those are the two challenges that we go through every day. And it doesn't matter to me that I've been researching for these long years. I have to go through that process constantly as I help people and as I help them answer their questions, and as I work at the BYU library. Basically, that's the process. I'm have people come in and explain to me what they're trying to find. And then my solution is to find the records. And sometimes I have no clue. What if they ask me about a country I have never looked at? I have that happen from time to time. And so this is the process we're going through. And I would further ask, for example, would you be able to bake a cake without a recipe? If you didn't have any directions and you didn't know anything about cooking, like me, I'm not a cook. And would I be able, I wouldn't even try. It's not something I would attempt because I could probably follow the recipe, but I probably wouldn't be able to do it perfectly. So we basically learning genealogy is like reading the recipe. In other words, we have all these instructions, we have lesson plans, we have everything organized that would teach you how to do, how to become a very, very proficient genealogist. And all of it is free. There is enough free instruction online to last you for ages. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I go along here. And the question I would then ask to anyone, and it's a very common question. I don't try to be rude when I ask the question, but I kind of get to this point and I say, well, maybe we have to learn about some of these things, or it would be a good idea if we understood how this all works. So this is an actual screenshot of a family back in the 1500s from the Family Search family tree. I've looked at it just yesterday and it's all been corrected. It's no longer here, but it kind of illustrates the question about, do you think you can actually do genealogical research without learning how to do it? It's a process. And there is actually some things that you need to know. And the fact that may be kind of obvious that this poor lady, Grace Steinrod, did not have 51 children. If she had, she would have probably been in about a lot of record books. And additionally, she probably did not have a number of children with the same name in the same years. So this is the kind of thing that you need to learn about as you start and begin the process. So here are the instructions. Let's get started. Mentioned that I'm associated with the Family History Guide, and so I have to, of course, mention that. I also might mention that the Family History Guide is also connected now directly to FamilySearch.org. It is part of the Learning Center, and it is used to teach, in our case, the missionaries at the BYU Library Family History Center. So we have used this now for years to teach missionaries how to do research. But we're also, and when I say missionaries, they are missionaries, church service missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they're acting as volunteers. And so what we have here is a structured, sequenced way to learn how to do genealogy with thousands of resources and videos and articles and links, and it's all free. It's completely free. And so you can go there and get this particular website, and it's called the fhguide.com. In addition, you can see this and step by step there. It's organized, it's sequenced so that when you get into it, if you know something, you can skip ahead. If you don't know, you can learn. If you have to go back, you can watch videos, you can find articles, you can see all the support that you need to learn about this, including how to do research in almost every country of the world that has any significant genealogical records. So another place, obviously, to get help is to go to the FamilySearch.org website. Before you even sign in or register, you'll open this screen and it will tell you with a button that says to get started. And there are a lot of resources here to get started. And if you go through this and you seem to you need more help or you need something else, really remember that all these or familysearch.org is a free, helpful website. Um, it's obvious when I say free that you need to have an internet connection and you need to have probably some device to connect to the internet, uh, even a smartphone. And it's interesting because when I'm doing support for people in Spanish in Latin America, a large percentage of them, a very high percentage of people are doing all their family research on a smartphone. And so this is it's enabled the resources are there on the smartphone just like they are on your computer. I think it's a little difficult to type on a smartphone. I'm not that coordinated, but I can see people who are, and it's a way to get things done. So Family Search has its Learning Center is a good place to get started. Here's a little short video that'll show you how to get to that Learning Center. You click on the little question mark up there and then get down on Help and Learning and scroll down a little bit. And there's a link down there to the Learning Center. And then here we have a whole series of classes that will teach you how to do research at a very, let's say, adequate level so that they'll answer a lot of your questions if you simply use this resource to learn about genealogy and all the other things that are linked from these resources. There's just an endless amount of information. If I'd had that much information, I would have progressed a lot faster in my early years. In fact, one of the big discoveries that I made after a few years of doing genealogy was that there were books telling me how to do it. And it was not easy because they weren't books that were available in the library and there was no internet and I didn't know how to find these books. And so I eventually, we did get the internet and that's when I began to accelerate uh, the amount of learning that I had. So there are 5 basic concepts of genealogical research. There's things that you need to know that are fundamental to your learning and to all the things that you need to know about how to do research. And I'm going to explain those a little more completely as we get into this. So this may seem obvious, but let's get to the point. And I deal with enough people who are absolute beginners that I understand that people need to learn this basic concept. Genealogy is source supported based on contemporary historical records. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that out there in the world, there are billions and billions of records that have been created by government agencies and countries or churches or business organizations or uh, anything that you can conceive of. If you go through your life think about your daily life as you're going through life. Uh, let's say we're getting in here in the United States, we're getting to begin a new school year. And all of my grandchildren are now in school. Even my youngest grandchild just started kindergarten this year. So all those 34 grandchildren have started school. Now, think about the process of going to school. What do you have to do? You have to fill out some documents. They have to register you. You have to register. You have to give them information. You may have to give them some health information. You may have to share other things with them. And where do those records go? Well, they go into the school records, and those school records are preserved somewhere. Now, you may be surprised, but those records are still around. You can find school records going back hundreds of years. Well, a couple of hundred years. So that's the kind of record. And think about everything else in your life. What if you pay taxes? Records. What if you go to the doctor? Records. What if you get employed? More records. What if you join or drafted into the army? More records. What if you move from one place to another? More records. What if you take a trip? More records. There are, uh, and we have a tendency to think that all this is new. Well, it's not all new. It's all the same, and it goes back hundreds of years. And some of these records easily go back into the 1500s. And some very few records go back even further. And so we've got hundreds of years of records. And so where do the records come from? Well, that's what I was saying earlier. That's what you have to do to be a genealogist is learn how to find the records. First of all, you have to know that there is a record. My general rule here is there is always a record. I always believe there is a record. That's my premise. Now, I don't always find the record, but I know it's there, and I know there must be a way to find it. And with the internet, and now with this artificial intelligence expansion to the internet, finding records is fairly easy from my perspective. It may seem very difficult at first, especially if you're technology challenged, but it's, they're there. The records are there. What about the problem? Then you hit the second wall of problems. The second wall of problem is, yeah, you might have a record, but it might look like this. The screenshot here. In other words, you're going to have to learn to read this kind of handwriting. Is there some way that will automatically change that for you? No. That is one of the major obstacles for going back past a certain point in the past, is that you're going to have to learn that. And if you looked at this closely, you would find out that it is written in a different language. And if you want to know, yeah, I can read this because I've spent that many years looking at these old records that I can read what this says. So there is, it's possible, and there's ways to learn that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the educational process as I go along here. So here's the key. So there's a key to this, and the key is the word is location. So when you want to find historical records, it's based on knowing the location of an event in your ancestors' lives. Now, what does that mean? It means that you want to know something happened, like a birth, like a marriage, like a death, like anything else that might happen to a person during their lifetime. And knowing that where that happened, you have to know where it happened. And why is that? Because genealogically valuable historical records are created at or near the time of an event in your ancestor's life or your relative's life by someone who either witnessed the event or had a duty to report the event. So in other words, you're relying on people who recorded the information, and then you're relying on the people who accumulated and stored that information and used it for whatever purpose. And then you're also relying on the fact that those records were preserved for the length of time to be available to you today. So let's give an example. Here's a church. This is probably, I believe, in Bavaria. And what happens on this with the record? This church would be part of, if it's German, which I think it is, it would be part of the vast Lutheran church in Europe. It could also be a Catholic church, but it looks more like it could be Lutheran. So what happens here is that someone in this church, usually the priest or the pastor, was required by the church organization to record, starting at a specific time in the past, to record births or christenings, that would be baptisms, and marriages and deaths or burials. If it's a church record, it's probably the baptism, the marriage, and the burial. And at some point in time, in addition to that, the governments, usually around the middle 1800s or a little bit earlier than that in Europe and around in other countries, began keeping their own records. And these are called civil registration records. And these records are uh, births and marriages and deaths, usually. So those records were starting to accumulate. And so what you have to do is find out where this person was baptized or where the person was married or where the person got, where they died or where they got buried. And that's kind of the opening because that location gives you the possibility of finding the records and some records that may have been created and preserved that are existent. Now, today, billions of those records, billions upon billions of those records are being digitized. That means people are taking photographs of the records and putting them online, and they're available to be searched. Sometimes page by page, sometimes there's an index, sometimes you can search by names, but those records are then uh, available for people like us who do genealogy that to be to be discovered, to be read, to be learned about. And the task is very hard. No one walks into from today's world, having gone through the educational systems that are in existence today, and walks into a church and starts reading records from the 1600s without some preparation and time and effort. But going back in time and learning step by step as you go back takes you back. And once you know the location, the key there is that you can then find the records that are pertinent. And it's an amazing experience. It's basically the bread and butter that feeds the desire to continue when you start finding the people and you find records that are actual records for those individuals and they come alive and you see that they had families and they had an occupation and they were existence and they lived there. And there's other records, there's census records, there's other records, there's an almost endless stream of records. That's why I say there are always more records. It's one of the rules of genealogy, actually. Keep good records about where you find information. Okay, now here is once that you start finding those records, then the responsibility for that information transfers to you as the genealogist, as the family historian. So you need to actually record that. And in other words, when we find a baptismal record in a parish register in whatever country, then we can make a note of that. Or if we find someone in a US Census record, we can record that's where that person did. And what does that do? Well, I could start out doing genealogy on paper and never share it with anyone. And I would give you today, if you live here in the United States or in another country where there's a lot of genealogy done, I would, most of Western Europe and North and South America, you're almost certain to find the fact that there are a lot of other people doing your genealogy because you have all those relatives out there and that you don't know about, especially if you try to go back into the 1600s. You know, when you go back by generations, you understand that it doubles every generation. It's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024 ancestors in that generation. And how many descendants? Thousands and thousands of descendants. So that's how you end up being related to so many people. But basically, one of the things that's the problem is that you don't have to start all over again. You can actually discover by going to the larger genealogy sites today, and I meant many of the not so large genealogy sites, that other people are doing research in your same lines, and you may be able to kind of join up with those people and learn that information. But as you find information that you don't know anybody else has ever found, which is really what the interesting part is, then you can share that by making sure that when you add that information to a family tree, that you tell everyone else where you got the information. So a source tells people where they can go to get the information. So here, and in the case of a family online family search, and this is an example from Family Search Family Tree, by clicking on that link to Eva M. Overson in the household of Henry Overson, the United States Census in 1900, you could actually see the original census record and see her as a child in that family. So that's the key here. Once you've begun the process and you find the information, you record the information and you make it available to everyone else, so everyone else doesn't have to do your work over and over again, and you don't have to do everybody else's work over and over again. So research, the concept here is to research back in time systematically. Don't jump over. We have a way of looking at people called a fan chart. And it's not I'm not a fan of fan charts because they make you, and they assume two things. One, they assume that every name that's filled in is accurate, which is questionable. And secondly, where there's an empty one, that's where you should start. Well, that's interesting. But like I said earlier, if you try that and you try jumping back and doing research in 1600s, you're very quickly going to find that it is not easy. It has never been easy, and that it's very seductive, however, because it's empty and nobody's found that. Well, in my case, if I find what's called an end of line, or when someone calls it a brick wall, it really is a brick wall because people with over 100, almost 150 years of genealogical research have yet to find that person. Now, you might find them because you have more records today than in any other time, and you have more access to those records than any other time. And I can guarantee you that if that's the case, that you will make your line go back past the traditional end of lines. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a time when there are no more records, period. There's just a time when people, ordinary people, were not recorded. Now you might find yourself related to royalty. Well, that's another whole different subject. But when you do that, by the way, once you get into those books and you're finding all these books with list all the royal families of Europe or whatever, that's your genealogy is over. You're not doing genealogy, you're just copying books. So we're not doing the research, you're not finding the families, you're just taking the time to copy. So constantly learn more about where and how to look for more information. That's the key. Every day I get online, every time I get back, I found in the last few weeks, I have found some of the most valuable records that I've been looking for years. With just one example, I can give you an example of a record that I discovered. Now it's been online. It's there. It's been there for years, and probably half the genealogists in the world already knew about it, and I didn't happen to focus on it. Didn't know. It just takes time. And no matter how much time you spend and what you spend, there's always going to be more out there to learn. And I found a directory of all of the parishes and dioceses in the entire Catholic Church. There are more than one of these directories. The one that I found, which is called gcatholic.org, is the actual catalog of everything. And it tells you every location. You search by the place, by the name of the parish, and you have, or the name of the town, and you have every parish and all the related parishes. I mean, it's an amazing website. But those are the kinds of things that you're going to discover as you go along and learn more and more about all these records and all these millions of places to look. And how do you get helped with that? Well, there's some of us that do it. Here's how I would suggest. This is just a suggestion for my friends in the United States. You might want to start with the 1950 US Census if your family lived in the United States. I would just go in and look up everybody you've ever heard of, Aunt Jane and Uncle Fred and Cousin Robert and all the people, and just go into the census records if they were alive in 1950 and find them all. And then record those in Family Search. Put your family tree in Family Search or some other website if you wish to do that, and uh, enter those informations and list the United States Census as a source. Now, if you say, well, I don't know how to do that, well, that's why we're talking about the step-by-step instructions that come from Family Search and other organizations like the Family History Guide. They will tell you how to do it and teach you how to do it step by step. And you can go back through and see, open up your program on one window and your instructions on the other, and follow through and follow the instructions, and you'll be successful in recording the information. And you might be amazed at the amount of information and the occupations and the places where the people lived. All that information is in the census. You may learn that your parents lived someplace you didn't know they lived. Uh, I found that out. The place they were listed was not a place that I knew that they were. So that was a surprise to me. And here's the challenge: find every family member of every family, every person you put in who lived and could during the time in the United States from 1850 to 1950, or in England from 1841 to 1921, and find every person in every family in every single census. Okay, I tried to do that with my great grandfather in northern Arizona very early on, just about the time that I started to get census records online. And I had to do a spreadsheet because I didn't have any way to record all that that was adequate. And it took me a long time because they have a lot of children. My great grandfather had 17 children. So, and they were from two wives, but they were 17 children. And that was a lot of records. Now, today, that was not be quite as formidable a job. But it's something that gives you a basis and a groundwork to begin building your family tree on a fairly stable um, foundation. Now, if you come from some other country, then you have to adapt and use the basic records that are there, the civil registration records, or the in some cases there are no census records, or the church records, or the other records that form the basis for your research. So once you get into one of these big websites like Family Search or Ancestry, MyHeritage, or Find My Past, you'll find that they give you record hints. They means record matches, or they suggest to you that they found a person, a record that belongs to your family member, your ancestor, or one of your relatives. But the idea here is that you need to, and the key word here is evaluate and appropriate. In other words, you think Elizabeth Ann Rossman is the same as Elizabeth Ann Brooke? Well, it might take you a little while to figure that out. Is this person that's suggested here actually the same person? Just because their name is Elizabeth Ann, let me tell you, there are probably a few million people in the English language who have the Elizabeth Ann name. And back in history for many, 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 probably a couple of hundred years. So this is not a quick thing. You may need to spend a considerable time thinking and find some additional sources before you say that this Elizabeth Ann Brooke, which is her maiden name, really died as is Elizabeth Ann Rossman because that was her married name. And if you have other records that shows you that connection, that's the process of doing the research and building the information and having and evaluating the sources. Now, if it says that she was born in England and this Elizabeth Ann, born in the United States, well, she was born in this one says she was born in Middlesex, England, but if she had been born in some other place, or the record said that she died in India or died in the United States or someplace, then you're going to have to connect it. Somehow you're going to have to actually think about that and justify it. So the issue here is location. Okay, well, we're getting to the end of this, and you can see there's a process in Family Search for adding that information. So get to know your grandparents, watch some videos. Here's the BYU Family History Library. We have 830 videos at this time. We've already added quite a few more. We add up to 4 a week or 5 a week sometimes. And so it's a great place to find a lot of information. If you need more, here's Roots Tech's collection. And when we go to the new Roots Tech in 2024, we will have a few other 100 more videos added to this collection of online. Some of them may disappear, some of them may be replaced, but there's a lot of information here. And you may want to learn how to read old handwriting. There is actually a structured free course in various languages, handwriting on the BYU or Brigham Young University scriptorial tutorial. And you'll only start learning when you finally decide to find your family. So take that first step, start learning, and you might find out who you really are. And keep learning and keep searching, but learn first. And thanks for watching. I guess we can take some questions if there are any. So, oh, I can't hear you.
Because I was muted. I do that all the time during meetings too. I apologize. Okay, let's take some questions. We just have a few minutes left, but there's a few really good ones. So Be Right on Facebook asks, if you are adopted, do you do research on the biological side or adopted side?
Both. It's up to you what you want to do. If you want to pursue either one or both lines or all your lines, you could be adopted and have DNA finding that your adoptive parents weren't your real parents. That nobody was your real parents, that somebody else was. So that's up to you, the choice. We don't have any discrimination about who we are related to because we don't have a control over it. So we do everybody.
Yeah. Kind of piggybacking off of that, Juliana asks, is there a way to record biological family on Family Search?
Yes, you can add alternative parents. You can then choose which set of parents you want to add and which lines. So yes, there is a way to do that.
Okay, great. We do have someone, and this question comes up quite a bit here at Family Search too. Belina Beach asks or says, I'm concerned about privacy if I put things online. Any advice that you would give to her, James?
Yeah, the first question of privacy is just don't put live persons online. It's not a good practice. There are ways to do that. Most of the programs will not show living people if they're marked living. So they're not going to be available to anyone except you. But on the other hand, the rule is dead people don't have privacy. So we don't have to worry about our ancestors' privacy. They don't have any. There's no consideration for hiding the information about dead people. It may be upsetting, it may be controversial, but it isn't private.
Okay, good thoughts. And then we have this last question to wrap up. DSR from YouTube asks, I realize for land deeds that I need to go to the Register of Deeds at the county level, but how do I find out information on an old house or barn? Example is when it was built, etc.
Okay, so you're talking to a real estate attorney that practiced real estate for 39 years. All of those records are in the counties. You just have to ask. But I would check online because most of the counties in the United States have now digitized all their deeds records. It may cost you have a fee. There may be some difficulty getting access, but those records are usually all available and they will be there. And the question about an old house or barn, it would depend. It would depend on the time. If it's really old, it's unlikely that anybody recorded when it was built, unless you find a journal or uh, sometimes the legal descriptions will contain it. There's lots of different ways, but there's just an overwhelming number of records that you can go through to find that kind of information.
James, this has been so wonderful. There's so much great information. As a reminder to everyone that's watching, and if you're watching the replay, keep asking your questions. We know James really well, so we'll reach out to him and ask if he has answers for you. And make sure that you register for RITSTech on September 18th. It opens on September 18th. The conference starts February 29th in 2024. You'll see James there too, I'm sure of it. And we will see you as well. Thank you, James, again. This was such a pleasure. You have so much knowledge, and we're so grateful that you shared it with all of us in this way. So thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
We'll see you.